Brothers and sisters, we have been going through a series of studies which I have entitled The Mother of All Wars. And I have to admit that I have been blessed as much as everybody else. The thing is, as we are going through these studies, my own understanding and my own perspective is improving. There's a verse in the Bible, I think it's Jesus who said it, that maybe it's not Jesus, but it says that the soul that watereth, he shall himself be watered, something to that effect. And it's true. I am being blessed, and I hope that we are not only being blessed, but that we might be motivated to share these lessons with other people. I think that is so important. When I look at even the One God movement, which I believe God has called, God has led the One God movement to a place of higher understanding of himself, of his identity. But it is distressing sometimes to see how locked this movement is in legalism, and how stagnant and immobile the movement is. And I believe that people really need to understand this bigger picture that we are looking at. So I want to encourage all of us to share these messages as far as we are able to do. So we went through, right now we're about study number 10, because we have looked at origins and issues. We have looked at the foundations. We have looked at corporate identity. We looked at the curse. We looked at God's solution. We looked at the second curse. Then we looked at kingdom principles. Then we saw the necessity of the old covenant. Last week we looked at the topic unfinished business. And each step that we have gone to, I have endeavored by God's grace to build on what has gone before. Now today I want to look at the subject of the new covenant. I know this is something that everybody in this room should be very, very familiar with. But what I believe is that we can, when we put things in context, when we look at it in the context of the other messages, sometimes we get a deeper understanding. And I think the new covenant is very important because it is an integral part of God's great plan of restoration. Let me just remind us at the beginning of the three great issues that are at stake in this mother of all wars. And I will always be reminding us of these three things because they are the things that keep us in perspective. The first issue was that Satan attacked the character of God. He has distorted, deformed it, lied about God until today. Almost the entire planet has a perverted understanding of the kind of person God is. That's issue number one. And what we saw was that Jesus dealt with this issue. In his life and his death, he revealed God in a way that the universe had never seen before, that anybody who looks at Jesus can never again have any reasonable questions as to the kind of person that God is. Then we looked at the third issue, which I'm putting second here because Jesus dealt with it second. The third issue was that Satan hijacked the human race, made captives of humanity, and brought us all under his umbrella, and we became the slaves of sin and the subjects of Satan. Jesus dealt with this when he broke the curse on the cross. He broke the curse and he saved us and delivered us from the dominion of sin. But last week especially, we looked at the fact that there is still something critical that is not yet done, not yet finished. And it is the vindication of the third issue. The third issue is the vindication of the name of God, the government of God. And that's actually, I would say, the second issue because that came up in heaven as well. But Jesus is dealing with it thirdly because it's not something that could be done by one act. It is something that involves people. It's something that involves a community, because to demonstrate a government, the effectiveness of a government, you need citizens. And we saw that this explains why there has been a 2,000-year delay. God has been building a community, and in this community, which began on the day of Pentecost, the church began with Jesus, but was really established at Pentecost, the church or the kingdom of God. And in this kingdom, the government of Christ is put on display. And this government will finally be perfected and vindicated and demonstrated to the universe in the final moments of time, as a part of the process of what the Bible refers to as the Day of Atonement. So in a nutshell, that is where we are. Now, I would like to deal with the topic today of the new covenant, because this is a part of the whole process of restoration, and I want to make sure that we all understand it as well as we're able, at least as well as I am able to understand it, because not only because it's an important part of the process, but it's tied to the other things that we have been studying. And because there are so many misconceptions and false ideas out there regarding this new covenant. So I'm going to go directly to my screen, and as we have done in the past, I want to use my images, my PowerPoint here, to illustrate today's presentation. The first question I want to ask, and the first thing I want us to get clearly, there are about 2 or 3 critical points that I believe we need to look at. But the first one I want us to understand is, what is a covenant? What is a covenant? And the traditional explanation, and I think I'm going to use my little highlighters. I might need it. All right. A covenant, the traditional understanding, the popular understanding of a covenant is what we see here. I got this definition from dictionary.com. And it says a covenant is an agreement or a promise usually formal, between 2 or more people or groups, and it's an agreement to do or not to do something specified. Notice that the key point here is that in a covenant, there is a commitment on the part of each of the parties. There's a commitment on the part of more than one party, okay? Each of the parties. So in the typical covenant, it's that you agree to do something and I agree to do something. It's a 2-part agreement. And this is what we see always. This is how people regard the covenants that God made with Israel. And I want to point out to you that because of this simplified understanding of a covenant, people apply this definition to the old covenant, and then they carry it over into the new covenant, because this simplified understanding is a thing that is stuck in people's minds, and because of it, it makes it difficult for many people to understand what is a new covenant. But first of all, I'd like us to get a good understanding of what the old covenant is about, so we can better understand the new covenant. Now, the Bible teaches clearly that there are 2 covenants. Even the Bible itself is based on the idea that there are 2 covenants. The word testament really means a covenant. And so when you see the Old Testament, it's talking about the old covenant. And when you see the New Testament, it means the new covenant. So that's what the word testament means. So even the layout of the Bible itself tells you that there are 2 testaments. Why am I saying this? Because it's important for us to understand that. Well, I'm going to say why in just a moment. All right. But here is where God shows us that there are 2 covenants. In Jeremiah chapter 31, he says, It says, behold, the days come, said the Lord, that I will make a new covenant. And of course, if there's a new covenant, it's clear that there has to be another one. There has to be an old one. And God said this covenant was to be made with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. If you don't understand the spiritual meaning of the New Testament, this might confuse you. But of course, in the New Covenant, Israel and Judah is the Christian body. It's those who are in Christ. But here in the Old Testament, again, you see God is using Old Testament terminology because this is what the people of that time could understand. And this is a great key, as we have understood. It's a great key for understanding the Old Testament statements. Everything, the prophecies are true, but the symbols must be changed to the understanding of what they mean now in our time. So God says he's going to make a new covenant. And he said it's going to be a different kind of covenant. He says it's not according to the covenant, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, said the Lord. So God says this covenant that he's going to make would be a different kind of covenant, not according. There's going to be something different. I made a covenant with them, but something is going to be different about the covenant that I'm going to make in the future. So God himself says that it's a different kind of covenant, and God himself uses the word a new covenant. So nobody should dare to say it's not a new covenant. Now, I'm emphasizing here that it's not a renewed covenant. And this is because I've encountered quite a number of our brethren who say it was not a new covenant, it was a renewed covenant. It was simply the old covenant, and God gave it to us again in the New Testament. Because they say what God gave to the Jews in the wilderness, the Israelites in the wilderness, was the everlasting covenant. It's the same covenant that he gave in the new covenant, but they say it was simply that the Israelites failed to keep the covenant because they went about it the wrong way. I'm sure most of us might have heard this argument. They say the only problem was that the Jews, the Israelites, let me not say the Jews were only one tribe. The Israelites, they say the Israelites tried to keep the covenant in their own strength, and that was the only problem. And what I'm wanting to show to us today is that this is a false idea. That was not the only problem. That was not the only thing that God changed when he said, I'm going to give you a new covenant. If you look at Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 13, it shows clearly that the old covenant is abolished and done away with. Paul says, in that he saith a new covenant, he has made the first old. So the first one is now old, and God has made a new one. Now that which decayeth and waxeth old, something which is rotting away and is growing old, is ready to vanish away. This is Paul's understanding of the old covenant. And if you say, why does he say it is ready to vanish away? Because in the days of the Apostle Paul, there were still Christians who were partially keeping some aspects of the old covenant. They didn't have a proper understanding. So even though the old covenant was done away with, but there were some who were still holding on to certain aspects of it because of their lack of understanding. And so Paul could say, the thing that is growing old and is rotting away is ready to vanish away. He's not saying that the old covenant is shaky and it is fragile and almost soon to pass. He's saying it is done away with. God makes a new covenant. He has made the first one old. We no longer have anything to do with the first covenant. I'm saying that as strongly as possible, wanting us to really embrace that idea. So the old covenant, what was it really? The old covenant is what God gave to Israel at Mount Sinai. This is what God means when he says, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to lead them out of the land of Egypt. This is where God met with them on Mount Sinai. Forgive the illustration, they have some form sitting on top of the mountain, but I guess it helps to make it a little more easy to follow. Now, God says to the Jews, and I want you to notice this. God makes an offer to the Jews, and here's what he says. If you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant. Notice this is God's offer to the Jews. It's not the Jews who are offering God anything. It's not the Jews' idea. It's not they who make a suggestion. It's God's suggestion. And the suggestion is, if you will obey my voice, I'm asking you to do something and keep my covenant. That's what I'm asking you to do. Then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and an holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel. God says, tell them this. And he gives Moses a message, and Moses goes to the people, and Moses says, God said, if you obey his voice, and if you keep his covenant, he's going to be your God, and you will become a holy nation. This is what I want you to tell them. Moses went to the people, and he told them what God had said, and the people responded. It says, and all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord had spoken, we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. So Moses was like a halfway man. He was a mediator, all right? He went between God and man, and he carried God's messages to the people, and he carried the people's messages to God. Now, the people said, we will do. Now, I've met upon people. I've been involved in groups that propose to teach righteousness by faith. And they propose to talk about the covenants. And these people say that the people give God a wrong answer. Now, if God comes to you and God says, if you will obey my voice, God comes to you and God says, if you will obey my voice, I will be your God. And he sends you a message like this. What are you supposed to say? They say that the people should have said, well, if you will do it for us, we agree. I respond by saying, these people are the people who say this are unreasonable and impractical. You expect a group of slaves coming out of Egypt, just introduced to God, you expect them to be able to know that they are unable to do these things? We have thousands of years of history. We have our own struggles with law keeping. We have our own Bible studies and so on, and we are finally beginning to get it. And you expected these 2 million just released slaves to have enough theological understanding to give God such an answer? And I would say that if you think so, if you think the people should have said this, you are most unreasonable. They not only were incapable of doing what they promised, but they were ignorant of their incapability, and that is the promise. That is a problem. The people said, we will do, and they were perfectly reasonable in saying this. If God Almighty comes to you and says, if you will do this, I will do this, what am I supposed to say? I'm going to say, okay, Lord, I will keep my part of the bargain, because you have offered me a bargain. Most of the time, probably, I would be so scared I don't even think about the implications of what I'm saying. But anyway, be that as it may, this was the old covenant, and I'm putting it to you that it was God who proposed the old covenant to them. And if you say, why? I will say to you, it was a part of God's great plan. Because as we know, the old covenant was never intended to produce righteous people. It was intended to produce failures that people could know that they need Jesus Christ. As Paul says, the law, the covenant then, was a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. That was the purpose God had in mind. God wanted them to be broken. God wanted them flat on their backs, that they could look up and know their need of God. He gave them something that seemed reasonable, but this thing was intended to teach them the truth about themselves. And that is the point. Let's continue. the key element of the Old Covenant was the Ten Commandments. And you can read this in Exodus 34, verse 28, and other places. It says, he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant. There you see that the Bible clearly tells you that the words of the covenant were the Ten Commandments. Okay? Nobody needs to question what was the covenant. The Bible tells you it was the words of the Ten Commandments. These were the words of the covenant. Now let's see if we can understand what was the goal or the purpose or the aim of the covenant. Now this may be one of the most important concepts we will look at today. What was the aim of the covenant? The covenant was designed, or it was intended. Let me put it another way. The old covenant could never give this, but the aim of the agreement made with God was righteousness. That's what was necessary on the part of the people. Righteousness. And there's a reason why I say righteousness. What I was saying is that the aim of the covenant was it had two parts to it. One was that the people could be protected, and the other part was that God would obtain righteousness from the people. Why would God need righteousness from the people? God was after something else, and we'll see what maybe later on. But on the part of the people, what they were to get was God. He was to be their God. He was to protect them and provide for them. This was the aim of the covenant. The terms of the covenant was the people provide the righteousness. And notice I'm using the word righteousness. I'm not using the word obedience. And there's a reason why I'm doing this, okay? The people were to provide righteousness. And according to this covenant, they were to provide this righteousness by doing what? By being obedient, by keeping God's word. That's how they were to obtain this righteousness. But the goal was righteousness. Let me go to a verse in the Bible to just highlight this. I think it's in Galatians. I don't want to have to look for it, but let me look. I think it's in Galatians 3. It says, right, see it here in verse 21. Is the law then against the promises of God? God forbid. For if there had been a law given which could have given life, truly, verily, righteousness should have been by the law. The goal was righteousness. The goal was life. That is what God was after. If you even go to Romans chapter 7, there's another verse here. Romans 7. Let me just highlight it again. Here it is. Paul says in verse 10, the commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. The commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death. Now, clearly, the commandment never provided life, and it never provided righteousness. But when you approached the covenant, when God gave the covenant on Mount Sinai, there are two things that were stated, and there were true things, but the way they were to be obtained is where the problem was. One, there was a need of righteousness from the people, and two, there was a need of protection and provision for the people. But the way it was to be provided was the problem. The goal was righteousness, and the people were to provide this righteousness under the system of the law. It was stated that the people were to provide this righteousness. It's not that the people could provide it, but the law required them to do it. God gave them the law and told them they should do it. And as I said, God's purpose was that they should discover their own hopelessness. But in the statement that was made, they should provide this righteousness, and they were to provide it by obedience to the law. In exchange, God would protect them and provide them. Now, the critical factor, the most important thing in this was man's performance. This is the highlight, the critical factor in the whole formula. It was okay to say you need righteousness. It was okay to say I will protect you. It was okay to say that God protects and provides. This is the problem. The people provide the righteousness. This is the reason why, this is the weak point why the whole system is going to fail. This weak point here that can't work. This is the bug in the ointment, man's performance. So you look at the system and it sounds beautiful. You obey, I protect, and I provide. But there's something in the whole system that makes the whole thing faulty. And as a matter of fact, there are two things, but I'm going to highlight the second one in a moment. Here's an important truth that we need to keep in mind as we go through this study. What is righteousness? Most of you have probably heard the popular definition. Righteousness is right doing. Righteousness is a doing word. I suppose we'd say righteousness is a verb. Okay? This is the popular understanding. And I'm going to say to you that this understanding is 90% of the problems we have sometimes when we are trying to do a proper study on righteousness by faith. We see righteousness as a doing word. It has to do with performance. This misunderstanding creates the misconception that righteousness is connected to performance. It becomes inescapable that righteousness is tied to the law. And when righteousness is tied to the law, the consequence is always that you end up with legalism. Because legalism, I'm going to give you my definition of legalism. You can think about it. Legalism, in my understanding, is a religion that is based on the law. It's a religion that is focused on the law. That's what is legalism. And you end up in legalism in the name of righteousness by faith. How do those two things come together? How can you be focusing on righteousness by faith? How can your ministry be aimed at righteousness by faith and you end up as a legalist? The reason is because your righteousness is tied, your concept of righteousness is tied to the law. You always see righteousness as relating to the law. You see righteousness as right doing. It's a behavioral concept. This is a huge misunderstanding. And let's move on and see what righteousness really is. True understanding, this is my, again, I'm going to say this is my definition. And I'm saying it's my definition because it's contrary to the popular understanding, but it's not my definition really. It's what you get when you study the Word of God. Righteousness is not a kind of behavior. It's not a series of activities. Righteousness is a state. It's the state of being right, not doing right. It's a state of being right with God. If you understand the messages that we have been sharing together over these months and years as to how we become right with God, what it means to be right with God, you can pick up immediately where the validity of what I'm sharing. The common belief is that you fall out of harmony with God because of your behavior. Sin is a behavior. That's a common understanding. What we have learned is that sin is a state. It's a state relating to your relationship with God. You are born in a condition, and when you are born again, you are in a different condition. So sin and righteousness are two conditions, not two kinds of behavior. If sin is a behavior related to how you relate to the law, then righteousness would be a behavior related to how you relate to the law. Both things are equal in that respect. But since sin is not a series of actions, but is a state of being, righteousness is the same thing. It's a state. Now, I would like to define righteousness as, let me see if I can scribble this. I can try. It's the state of rightness. It's a state of rightness with God. Not, if I take away the word righteousness and I put the word rightness, maybe you get a different understanding, because how can a person be right in the eyes of another person? The legalists say the only way you can be right is you have to go and do what is right. You have different ways of being right. For example, if I were to do something to offend Brother Andrew, let us say I was to come into his home and I was to take away something that belongs to him. I have done something wrong, and something is wrong in the relationship between us. Now, there are two ways that I could seek to fix that problem. One is I could return what I took. But another way is if Brother Andrew says, Brother David, what you did doesn't matter to me at all. I receive you and I accept you as my brother, as though nothing ever happened between us. 100%. Now, that is hard for a human being. But if that were possible and he could do this, then things are right between us again. Things are right between us. And yet I never did anything right. You see what I'm saying? So if you view righteousness as a kind of, as related to performance, then you will always have a single narrow-minded concept. But if you understand that righteousness really comes from the two words rightness, and I think that's where it originated, really. Rightness, it's a state of rightness with God. But the concept is rampant that rightness depends upon right performance. Because it is not understood that there's another way to be right without performance. That's the problem. Being right with God is not based on how well we perform, but we discover it is based on whether or not we trust God. I'm not going to say too much about this, but this is where this is what we have come to understand. It's not based on our performance, but it's based on our trust in God. That's what it boils down to. We'll look at that a little bit more as we proceed. This makes it evident that righteousness is not connected to the law. And that is how we are able to escape. We are able to escape a legalistic religion. I don't know how important this is for most of us, but for me, it is very important, because in trying to share this message, whether it is on YouTube or Facebook or other areas of witness, I find I am constantly accused, attacked, assaulted by people who say that, by people who are focused on performance. And they have a great deal of objection to what I'm trying to share this morning. But sometimes I feel that it's because they never stop to listen and to understand what is being said. And I believe, we might meet upon the same kind of issue. People are law-oriented, and they don't see that when you are law-oriented, you cannot escape a legalistic religion. Your religion, those of you who bother to go on Facebook and who get into discussions there, it is painful. It is distressing to see the level of legalism that is promoted there in the name of righteousness. Everything is fixated on the law, especially if you go into the circles of Adventism. Everything is related to the law. And yet, many of these brothers and sisters, they say they are promoting righteousness by faith. But it's righteousness based on our performance, even though they say it is God who helps the performance. But it is the performance that is the critical attribute, and it is performance that comes out of you that qualifies you. It is when we can come to the place that we understand that righteousness is not connected to the law. It's not connected to the law. The law is irrelevant when it comes to righteousness. I'm going to say it that way. That's when we can come to understand that we can come to escape from a legalistic religion. Now, Israel immediately got into problems because as soon as Moses went upon the mountain, the Lord said unto Moses, "Go, get thee down, for thy people which thou broughtest out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them." They went ahead and they made this golden calf and they worshiped the calf. The first problem, Paul highlights it, and I just want to bring it to the fore. These poor Israelites never knew. But here's the problem. For we know that the law is spiritual. God gave them something spiritual. But I am carnal. Paul wasn't speaking of himself as a Christian. He's speaking of himself as he was as an Israelite. I am carnal. Here was a group of carnal people, and that's why I'm saying they came out of Egypt. They were incapable. They didn't know. But here was the problem. You have a spiritual law and you have a carnal people. And what does it say about when you are carnal? The carnal mind is enmity against God. It is not subject to the law of God. So God could have given them 5,000 laws on Mount Sinai, or he could have given them one instead of 10. It doesn't matter. The consequence, the result would have been the same, because the carnal mind is not subject. It's an impossibility. It's not subject to the law of God, and it cannot be. Neither indeed can be. So that was the first problem that you had in that Mount Sinai situation. The first problem was carnal people. And carnal people means incapable people. As Paul pointed out again in Romans 7, he says, "Now then, it is no more I that do it." It's not I who do it, he's saying, "but sin that dwelleth in me." All right, he says the problem is not me. It's not me. It's not that I'm not fighting. Because he says to will is present with me. I'm fighting, I'm willing. But how to perform that which is good, I find not. I can't do it. For the good that I would, I do not. But the evil that I would not, that I do. It was not unwillingness on the part of the Hebrews, the Israelites. It was incapability. They couldn't. Not because they wouldn't, but they couldn't. And that is why, it's a little unreasonable if we blame the Israelites. I mean, we do blame them. We do highlight their weaknesses. We do highlight the things they got into. But if you think of it objectively, this is the reason why we can sympathize with sinners. This is the reason why we don't condemn people who do less capably than we do, because we understand many times it's not unwillingness. Somebody calls me a nasty name. Somebody steals from me. Somebody behaves in a rude, uncivil manner to me. My human instinct is to get upset. But when I stop and remember the doctrine of the two Adams, when I remember the doctrine of sin as we are studying it here, I can forgive them. I can understand. Nobody sets out to be wicked, well, unless they are totally given over to Satan. But people end up wicked, they end up wrong, they end up bad because they are incapable. Not because they want to be that way, but it's the reality of the carnal person. That is what I'm saying. So the Bible says, God says in Hebrews chapter 8, verses 7 to 8, Paul says, for if that first covenant had been faultless, then should no place have been sought for the second. So Paul says there was a fault with the covenant, all right? There was a fault. But it says here that God found fault with the people. So first of all, there was a fault with the people. And so God says, behold, the days come when I will make a new covenant. There has to be something different because this one is not working. And we are told that this fault was with the people. All right? So the people are a problem here. But I'm going to say to you, this is not the only problem. Because if this was the only problem, then all that God would do is fix the people. But God did more than fix the people. The second problem, 2 Corinthians 3 verses 6 and 9 highlights to some extent the second problem. It says, God has made us ministers, able ministers of the New Testament or of the New Covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life. But if the ministration of death, notice what Paul refers to here now, the ministry of death. And what is this ministry of death? It was written and engraven in stones. He's talking about the Ten Commandments, and he's calling it the ministry of death. So it's not just that there was a problem wrong with the people. You have to say there was a problem with the ministry itself. Further on, I'm going to skip a little bit because my time is running out. Further down, he refers to that as the ministration of condemnation. All right, so there was also a fault. There was also a fault with the format of the law, not just the people, but the format of the law. The law was letter. It was not spirit, and that was the second problem with the covenant, because the law was in a form where it could demand something of you. It could tell you what you needed to do. It could tell you what it wanted, but it left you helpless. So it's not just that the people were a problem, it's that the master over the people was also a problem, because the master was incapable of recognizing that the people are incapable. It's like a man who beats a child over and over because the child cannot walk. Or let's say, for example, the child has a speech impediment. He cannot say the. He always says the. The. His tongue cannot make the th sound. He says the. And his master, whether the teacher or his parents, beats him over and over to say the. And he keeps on saying the, because his tongue is tied and he cannot lift his tongue. And so he's beaten over and over for something that he cannot fix. And this was the law. It wasn't just that the people were incapable. It was that they were under a system that was beating them for their incapability. So both the people were wrong and the system was also wrong, because the system is requiring what it cannot supply. So this is how it is with the letter of the law. The letter of the law can look at you and tell you, do this, do this. It cannot help you, but it condemns you. That's why Paul says, when the commandment came, sin came to life and I died. The commandment which was ordained to life, which was intended to give life, or which was supposed to give life, I found to be unto death. That's the problem with the letter. As long as you relate to the letter, you will always fail, because the letter demands, but it cannot give. The spirit of the law is what we really need, and we'll come to that in just a moment. What is the difference? The letter is written instructions. As I said, it tells you what to do, and that's all it can do. The spirit is a living person. 2 Corinthians 3 and verse 17 says, the Lord is that spirit. And that is why, brothers and sisters, I have a great problem with the brethren who says that this is how we get the spirit. It is through internalizing written instructions That's what it means that we have the Holy Spirit. These brethren will deny that Christ actually lives in you. And this is what they promote. All right? I know we are not focusing on negativity this morning, but still I have to bring that up because it's a part of the reality of what we live in. It's a part of the reason why I am very strongly opposed to those who believe that it is the words of Christ that is the Spirit.
Yes.
The words are nothing but written instructions. And that is what kills. And the Spirit is a living person. That is what gives life. And based on what we just said, you can see written instructions can tell you what to do. It cannot help you. A living person does not tell you what to do. But as we go to the next point, you will see the letter is outside of man while the living person is inside of man. So he not only tells you what to do, he gets inside of you and does through you and in you what needs to be done. This is a good husband. This is a good master. He doesn't stand aside and demand of you. He comes and he holds your hands and he strengthens you and he does through you what needs to be done. This is a difference. It's not just a difference where it says, okay, the words that were outside, I'm going to put those words inside. Okay, I'm going to make you a little bit stronger. No, the whole system changes. The letter acts on the intellect. And my goodness, you find so many Christians who are Christians by intellect. They can give you a Bible study, they can speak the right words, but the ministry of the Spirit, it acts on the Spirit. It's a living person inside of man, and it acts on your spirit. And that is where change comes from. That is where you are changed, where hate becomes love. And where discouragement becomes vibrant encouragement. And where failure becomes victory. That takes place in the spirit, not in the intellect. What you have in the intellect is sophisticated self-righteousness. What you have in the intellect is a form of godliness. And that's what the ministry of the letter does. The letter depends upon your response and on your abilities. The Spirit depends on God's abilities. So these are the differences, brothers and sisters, between the two kinds of ministry. And that is why, obviously, the old covenant was a temporary system, as we pointed out week before last. Now, the definition of ministry, I don't think we need this, but let me just go through quickly. Ministration means ministry, means administration, it means government. So it's two systems of government. You have the government of the letter, or the administration, or the ministry, the way you were served. And then you have the ministry of, I beg your pardon, then you have the ministry of the Spirit. The effect of the ministry of the letter. The law, it says, worketh wrath. And the word wrath in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, many times people understand it to mean God's anger, but more often than not, it simply means condemnation. Condemnation is wrath. It's a state of being where you are under condemnation. Now, the law produces condemnation, because where no law is, there's no transgression. Paul said if there's no law, then nobody can break it. And so there's no problem. You are not condemned. But once the law comes in, you are condemned. Why? Because you cannot do what it is demanding. So the only thing you get is condemnation. Somebody says to me, David, carry this bag. It's 200 pounds, but I have a back problem and I'm not very strong. And it keeps on telling me, carry this 200-pound bag. All it can do is condemn me, expose my weakness, and set me up for punishment because I cannot do it. But yet it is the law. It may be the right thing to do. But for me, it is condemnation. And if somebody had not said this, I would not be condemned. I would not have had to break the law. That's what Paul is saying. That's how the ministry of the letter works. All it can do is bring condemnation. And so Paul says, I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. For many people, for people who are under the ministry of the law, It is something like this. The law becomes a rule of behavior, a stick that does nothing but beat you continually and condemn you and make you aware of your limitations. That's what the ministry of the law does. You either end up being broken or you end up pretending that you are keeping it when you know you are not. So as I said, there's a twofold problem. The people were weak and incapable, while the law was perfect and uncompromising. That's problem number one. Problem number two was the government of the law. The government or the law required what was impossible. If I cannot do it, you should not require it. So you have a problem with the way the law works, and you have a problem with the condition of the people. And so two things needed to be changed. The system required the right thing of the wrong person. There was need of a change of government. Paul says, when he talks about the new covenant and the change of government, he says, sin shall not have dominion over you. The word dominion means to be your master, to control you. Why? For you are not under the law, but you are under grace. So what does he mean by saying that sin shall not have dominion over you? That's another complete study. But here you have it illustrated. The law, sin works like this chain around a man's neck. Paul says he is a slave to sin. He was a slave to sin. Sin was his master when he was in this condition of being under the law. The law puts you in a place where you are not able to escape from sin, and yet you are chained to sin. The law does not help you, and yet it is demanding something of you. And under this condition, sin always dominates your life. And Paul says the way to escape from this is that you're no longer under the law. Beg your pardon. You're no longer under the law. You come to the place where you're under grace. As I pointed out, the goal was rightness with God. Rightness. A better concept of righteousness. Rightness with God. How to be right with God. The law, the way of the law, is to require man to be obedient through obedience to the law. To require man to be righteous by obedience. That was the first way. The second way, the way of the new covenant, is to make man righteous by bringing him to peace with God independently of his behavior. All right? If you can take man's behavior out of the way, and yet you can make him righteous. If you can find a way to take away man's behavior and still make him righteous, you have solved the problem. Remember, the goal is not obedience, the goal is rightness. It's the first way, the way of the old covenant, that says to be righteous, you need obedience. To be righteous, you need obedience. And you need obedience to the law or to the rules. That's the first covenant. It ties righteousness to obedience. And that is tied to the law. The second way, you have righteousness, you achieve the goal, and it has nothing to do with your obedience and nothing to do with the law. Let me see where we are. I know I'm past my time. What about good behavior? I know somebody will ask, what about good behavior? Does God intend that, okay, then you're righteous without any good behavior? What then? But see what we see. A part of the new covenant is to provide good behavior, but not in order to obtain righteousness. You have that already. Good behavior is a bonus. All right? This is not something that you need to be righteous. It's a bonus. It's something that God gives you in addition But we must understand that this is a bonus. This should not come into this discussion when we are talking about righteousness. This is how righteousness comes, independently of behavior. The good behavior is the bonus. All right. I know we might probably have some questions at the end, but I am rushing because I have not completed my thoughts, and I know that we are already over time. So Romans 8 verses 3 and 4, Paul says what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. We have been looking at this. It was weak because of the flesh. God sending his own son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness, there you have it, the rightness of the law, the rightness demanded by the law, might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Now, Paul says it's the righteousness of the law, because it's the righteousness that is demanded by the law, not that the law provides it, because I wanted to look at what it says next. But now, Paul says, the righteousness of God, this is what we need, without the law. Without the law, God has given this righteousness, the thing that we needed, the thing that the law demanded but couldn't give. And because it demanded it and couldn't give, God found a way to give it without the law. He eliminated the law from the process. He eliminated the law. Because where the law is in the picture, first of all, it creates challenges for us. Because even when we are born again, even when we have this gift of the new life, sometimes we might stumble. And if we stumble sometimes, what then? It means that we are gone back to the place where we were before. We need the death of Christ all over again. But no, God's new system makes allowances for the times that we stumble, because the times that we stumble, they don't matter in terms of righteousness. They don't matter, because we are saved by grace through faith, not the righteousness of the law. Therefore, if you happen to stumble, it does not matter where righteousness is concerned. It matters in terms of your witness, yes, but it doesn't jeopardize your salvation unless you completely reject Christ. Because our righteousness is God's righteousness, and it is without the law. And if it is without the law, then the law cannot come in to argue that we have broken it. That's what God has done for us in the new system. God's solution. This shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, said the Lord. I will put my law in their inward parts. Now, God talks about my law, and sometimes this misleads people. Put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people, and they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me. Now, to me, this is a greater part of the statement. This is the greater part of the statement. Do you know why this first part is there? Because the people that Jeremiah was speaking to, the people that God was speaking to through Jeremiah, all they understood was righteousness by the law. And when God talked about giving them a new way of pleasing him, a new way of being acceptable, God put it in the context of the law, because that is all they could understand. But God says he would put it somewhere where it could actually not be written. Put it in their hearts. Who can write on your heart? What does he write? 10 words? 10 statements? 10 paragraphs? No, that's not what he's saying. What he's really saying, he's going to give you a new heart, a different kind of heart. He's going to make you into a new person. And the key element is that they shall all know me. This is the point, because what is it that God was after? Let me pause a little bit to just make a point here. You have to break through all the smoke and get to the real point. You know what was the real point? The real point was that there was alienation between man and God. Man was wrong with God, and man needed to be right with God, and the rightness is what we refer to as righteousness. But what is the condition of this rightness? You know what it was? You can compare it to a broken trust between friends. Friendship broken. That is it. The fault was on our part. It was on Adam's part, and we inherited it. There was a fault on our part. And God came first of all, and God says, okay, we can fix this relationship. You know what you need to do? You need to obey the law perfectly. And we can fix this relationship, because he wanted to teach them something. But you cannot fix broken trust. You cannot fix a broken covenant by trying to perform your way into favor. What they needed was a state of friendship between themselves and God. And that's what God found a way to do. When he says, I will put my law in their inward parts, he didn't just give them rules, he gave them himself through his son. He gave his son to become one with us, to live in our hearts, to bring God into our hearts. Can you be more reconciled to God than having God living in you? Can you be more right with God than to have God himself being a part of your life? Can you be more right with God than that? If God has come to make his life, his person, a part of your person, can you add to that blessed relationship through your performance? And that is the point. This is what the new covenant is about, brothers and sisters. It's about more than simply a kind of way of keeping the rules. And every time you come back to that, you introduce legalism into your religion. I praise God that I respect the Ten Commandments. And by the grace of God, I endeavor to walk by the Ten Commandments. But they are not my righteousness. And they are not the basis of the relationship between me and God. That is the point. The whole problem is because in every argument about righteousness, some of our brethren are always bringing in the Ten Commandments because their religion is law oriented. We need to be God and Christ oriented and understand that this was what God was always after: reconciliation and oneness with the people. And that oneness is not based on our performance, it's the righteousness of God without the law. And the final thing I want to highlight is this verse. God puts it probably even a little better than in Jeremiah here. Well, who am I to say God does one thing better? Yeah, let me put it that way. God puts it more clearly in Ezekiel than in Jeremiah, because God says, he doesn't put it in the context of the law. He says, a new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you an heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you, and I will cause you to walk in my statutes. You notice that even here, God highlights again the keeping of the law as a part of the process. Because as I said, if you are talking to the Israelites in the Old Testament, how can you help them to understand what they need? You always put it in the context of law and obedience, because it was the only thing they could understand. They knew nothing about the living relationship with God that Jesus introduced to us, where God is our Father, where Jesus comes to live inside of us. They could not know this. And so the best way God can explain it is, I will put my law inside of you. I will cause you to obey these laws, because that's how they understood righteousness. And yes, we do walk in harmony with those rules, but not because they have anything to do with our righteousness. And so we are said to be the letter of Christ, written not with ink, but written with the Spirit of the living God. That is what we have, brothers and sisters. We are a letter, we are an epistle of God, an epistle of Christ, and people can look at us and they can see the signature and the handwriting of God in our lives. So this is what Paul says. And the last verse I will use is just to remind us that we are not made ministers of the letter, but we are ministers of the Spirit. This is our message, because the letter kills while the Spirit gives life. So this is where I'm going to stop this morning. I'm sorry that I went a little bit over time, but to be honest, I had to rush through because there is so much that could be said in dealing with this topic. But I hope that most of us were able to get the main concept that I was trying to get across. You know, may the Lord help us that as we study together, as we go through these things together, our relationship with our Father may grow stronger, and our ability to share the gospel may become stronger.